Welcome, everyone. My name is Andrew Gaffney. I'm editorial director with Demand Gen Report. I'm glad you could join us for today's session. I'm joined today by some really smart folks from our Content for Demand team. We're going to be addressing the topic of influencer marketing and influencer content. We're looking at, is it time to evolve your B2B influencer strategy? We've been seeing some interesting trends. Influencer has obviously been a hot topic. We've covered it at our B2BMX event for the past few years. But we're seeing some interesting evolution around the formats that people are using influencer content for, how they're integrating into their strategies, how they're thinking about it beyond just sort of top of funnel, and also just digging into some examples of that. So I wanted to ask our team from Content for Demand, we have our content strategist team with us, to introduce themselves first, and then we're going to get into some topics and examples. Tanya, can I start with you?
Yeah, hi, Andrew, and hi, Retai team. This is Tanya Venus. I'm Vice President of Content Strategy and Services at Content for Demand.
Awesome. Thank you for joining me. Brenda.
Hi, Brenda Kane, and I'm a Senior Content Strategist, Content for Demand.
And Alicia.
Hey, everyone. I'm Alicia Esposito, and I'm also a Senior Content Strategist for Content for Demand. Great to be here.
And like the rest of the world, we're all coming at you virtually from our home offices. So let me dig into the topic as we set it up. So, Alicia, I'm seeing B2B brands that are thinking more holistically, seem to be taking a more strategic approach. Some of the clients that you guys are working with on Content for Demand, I'm seeing some really interesting ways that they're utilizing influencer, I think beyond sort of the conventional. Can you start off sharing some of the compelling examples you've seen or projects you've worked on where it's influencers gone beyond sort of like the one-off asset and thinking more in an integrated way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the most exciting thing about the evolution of influencer marketing in B2B. I think in the early days, it was, let's try and curate input from some experts into a big rock piece. And while that's still very much present, our teams, our partners are thinking a lot more holistically, thinking bigger about how to maximize the reach and value of that input from the influencer community. So this is a great example from Bottom Line Technologies. We've actually done an influencer campaign with them. This is our second year, and this is the latest iteration. And the reason why I wanted to share this version is because we really built upon the success of the first year and really evolved it to be a more extended foundational piece for the bottom line business as a whole. The first year, there were very specific targeted goals around an event, and we actually collaborated with the comms team for this. And the reason why is they wanted to extend it across more channels, across more campaigns, and really get the most value possible out of this. So this is just the big rock piece. Due to COVID, they've had to pause some of the amplification and reuse and repurpose of the piece, but it is very much still designed with a holistic strategy in mind, which is very exciting to see how that will all unfold in the future. Another example that really comes to mind for me is we did quite a few influencer initiatives with Bing back in the day, but this particular example is for the marketing community. So we created a content hub experience where people could kind of self-select a variety of different resources, but the foundation of it was a podcast series. And with each episode, we interview an expert such as, Lee from Top Rank Marketing, people who are very much marketers through and through, assist and guide marketers. So these podcasts kind of acted as the linchpin for that hub experience, and their insights were reused and repurposed for blogs. So different points of entries for different preferences. And I think that really speaks to, I think some things we'll be getting into later around repurposing influencer insights. But I just really liked how the influencers were the connecting dots, so to speak, throughout multiple channels and multiple touches in an overarching campaign.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it in a serious way. It was really interesting. Brenda, I know some of the work that you've done has really tried to maximize social with influencer programs. Can you talk about some of those examples?
Sure. Thanks, Andrew. So I've been working with Oracle for probably more than 3 years now on different influencer programs, and I'm definitely seeing them move beyond just publishing blogs. So one of the things that we're seeing them do more, and I will get to the social in a moment, but we're seeing them collaborate with their influencers more on a whole series rather than just one blog. So they're trying to build deeper relationships with the influencers. And in terms of social, what they're doing is the influencers are using their own social channels, their own communities to amplify the messages on their own sites and direct people to the Oracle blogs. In fact, we have one influencer right now who's turned the interview that we did for a blog into a podcast that he's publishing and promoting on his own site. So that's kind of a way to really extend what they're doing. I think even more important than that is that one of the Oracle clients I work with is now really collaborating very closely with others in the company, including their PR team, to combine their efforts and cross-pollinate different sites. So in the past, they seemed to really work much more in isolation, but we're definitely seeing that changing. So they're really working hard to coordinate efforts and gain synergies. And for the ones I've been working on, we're still mostly in the blog realm, but I think we're definitely moving beyond that. And right now, and for all of the blogs that we do, we're creating GIFs and helping them really promote those messages across social channels.
So Tanya, I wanted to ask you, Alicia and Brenda shared some examples, kind of a success, but what are you still seeing that clients you're seeing or other B2B brands out there, what are they still doing wrong in terms of influencer?
I see two big things. First is I think there's an overemphasis on looking at the number of followers influencers have on LinkedIn and Twitter, and really assessing their worth based solely on that. Technology is becoming such a niche play, and not just technology, but in other industries as well, whether you're making equipment or you're providing some type of professional service. And so as this is happening, there's a lot more communication going on outside of those social media platforms, and to just rely on them, you're really cutting yourself off. For example, we did an influencer program that included a lot of data scientists, and believe it or not, there's a newsletter that goes around the data science community that is more influential, I think, and we found, than a lot of the social media channels. In fact, a lot of the influencers that we were researching didn't even use Twitter in the data science field. So that's one problem. The other is that you really need to look at these relationships as true human relationships. If they're transactional in nature, your audience is going to be able to tell. There's not going to be an authenticity there, and what they're searching for is going to be missing from the influencer's message.
Thanks for that. I wanted to dig in a little bit further. We've talked in the beginning about a lot of influencer programs have been used in demand gen programs and thinking about it sort of top of funnel. I wanted to ask all of you, how are you seeing that evolve? Are you seeing it used in different ways now for different marketing initiatives?
Yeah, so I'll start off here, and I know Tanya and Brenda have a few more ideas, but I think one really exciting next phase of influencer marketing is leveraging influencers for ABM. And we've done quite a few projects where we're really trying to zero in on a very specific target buyer or target audience. So this example is with a partner of ours, Access. And even though they, broadly speaking, have document management solutions, they have one solution specific to HR professionals. So really we wanted to aggregate HR experts, HR technology experts, and really get their take on what does the future of digital transformation look like? What do HR leaders need to do to be successful? So although there was a minor connection to Access's positioning in the marketplace, this was a great way to really zero in on the top of mind challenges, questions, and needs of the HR audience. So the buyers knew, okay, Access is in with the right people. They kind of understand our positioning and the key trends that are happening in the marketplace right now. And it's connected to a much broader campaign with different content assets that supported this narrative, but got a little bit deeper into Access solutions. So it's really effective. Another example is we did a piece with Oracle's for their SCM or supply chain solutions. And this is a few years back at this point, but it was a great way to bring in, again, a very specific audience and very specific group of experts and influencers, which, to Tanya's point earlier, was very interesting to mine and find the right people for this piece, because there is that mix of where are their watering holes, what touch points do supply chain professionals use to get information. So we were able to get a good mix of analyst types, more practitioners to really share their take. Again, you could tell from the title, it's Supply Chain 2020. So this was quite a work in progress for a very critical, more future-proofing type piece. So again, very targeted to a specific audience, ideal for ABM type programs. And then Brenda, I didn't know if you had another example for this to share.
Yeah, actually, my example follows perfectly on that, because this is also an ABM strategy. So I have a client, SOC Telemed, that provides actually the specialists, the program coordination, and a technology platform for acute and post-acute telemedicine. So I know we're pretty familiar, especially right now, with consumer telemedicine, but here we're talking about services for a situation where a patient might arrive in an emergency department, say with a stroke or after an attempted suicide, or maybe it's already an inpatient. So it's much more sophisticated, a complicated environment with AI-assisted physician assignment and very advanced tech hardware. So obviously there are a limited number of healthcare organizations in the country, so it's definitely ABM. And what the marketing team there is focusing on is influencers to help build credibility in a market that's much more familiar with the consumer players than with SOC Telemed. And actually, the pandemic has given them an unexpected opportunity to do this by using internal and external influencers to address how hospitals responded to and are continuing to address the virus. So in their case, they're using a lot of physicians because they have credibility. Obviously, some of them have been working directly in emergency departments during the pandemic. So it really gives them a lot of credibility. And it's more about educating not how SOC Telemed can assist with these COVID-19 patients, but more how hospitals can continue to provide their other services like neurology, psychiatry, other emergency services, while limiting the exposure of their clinicians and patients in the facilities to COVID-19 or any other viral contagion, actually. So what they're doing with influencers and with their other content is really helping the hospitals and healthcare systems understand how to evaluate SOC Telemed solutions compared to competitors who play mainly on the consumer side, as I said. And it also is establishing themselves as trustworthy experts on the whole telemedicine landscape. So it's really also positioning them as real thought leaders in the industry for those targeted customers.
Yeah, before we move on, I do want to tack on to your point, Brenda, around, how some of these plays are largely, top of funnel to position the company as thought leaders, trusted experts. I think the other trend that I'm really seeing is the expansion of influencer strategy and community-driven strategy into other stages of the buyer's journey. There have been some fascinating conversations with clients, with partners around how does influencer strategy change or evolve as we get into middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel, even post-purchase, right? And I think that lends itself to a much bigger conversation around what does an influencer really mean? How is that defined? And how does that definition possibly change as we think about how can we integrate trusted experts and third parties into content for those latter or middle stages of the buyer's journey? And I think that's the interesting puzzle right now, but it also lends itself to a lot of opportunities. I know, Tanya, you and I have talked about this a few times, so would love for you to share your take on that.
Yeah, definitely influencers can be used in all stages of the funnel. And one of the things you can think about is in-person events. Definitely using your your influencers for in-person events. And I know that our client Oracle does this quite a bit. We do a lot of influencer blogs for Oracle, but they also try to get those influencers to their events, because those are the places where buyers are, kicking the tires, taking things for a road test. So that does kind of target the later stages of the funnel. And they found it to be very effective to have those people there. I assume now that some of that's going to be moving online, probably in the form of podcasts, webinars, and online events.
Tanya, what's your perspective on some influencers that I've seen have worked well, where it's really hearing from peers in their sector, people with similar titles? What would you see as the difference or some of the nuance between using peers and more expert influencers?
So that's a great question, Andrew, because peers and influencers are really two different things, but sometimes they kind of, there is a cross there. And this is a good example. This is a blog that is an influencer blog. It is a post-purchase influencer. Tina Mashika is a vice president of finance at Western Digital. Western Digital is an Oracle customer. But Western Digital just had this crazy period of acquisition that was unlike any other, it was very unusual. And they had 3 companies coming together and merging at once. And this blog is basically about how they use technology to make that go smoothly. So that's a story that Oracle had published. It was well known. It was used in a lot of their marketing. And then when we started doing an influencer program for their financial software, we decided to look to Western Digital for a possible influencer. So how is Tina Mashika different? How is she rising above a peer and is at the influencer level? Well, simply because she's vice president of such a large global organization, and she has a lot of authority. And I thought it was interesting how they took the story that they had and they specifically put this Women in Finance title on it, because that's one that really resonates on their blog platform well. It gets a lot of views, it gets a lot of attention, and so they sort of retold this story in an influencer format, and it made a great influencer post. And Tina, in this article, speaks about how she was able to rely on that technology to accomplish things that were very instrumental in making those mega mergers go well, and thus raising her position as a financial executive at this large global organization.
So I wanted to ask if you could expand on, and we were just talked about the difference or some of the nuances between peers and influencers. In terms of the potential list of influencers, where they come from, can you folks expand on sort of where they can come from, what types of influencers there are?
So let me just start off, and then I'll pass it to my fellow teammates here. Look at your current content. This was what we did in this case. We saw a story that was about a company and decided to look a little bit farther. Is there anybody at that company who could potentially be an influencer? So that's one good place to look. Look at your content you have now.
In fact, Tanya and I have both discovered that there are some subjects that simply don't have a lot of influencers, and the influencers that do exist are often in great demand and charge significant fees for their time and effort. So in these cases, as we've been talking about a little bit, we need to expand that definition of influencer. I like to include any highly knowledgeable, articulate, credible subject matter. Our B2B buyers, they want trusted expert information. And I think, as we've said already, we get too hung up on how many followers an influencer has rather than the value of their expertise that they can offer the buyers. If they're outside experts, they're still giving that objective viewpoint to the discussion, which is what the B2B buyers are looking for when they're looking at influencers. So again, as we've talked about before, I like to enlist channel partners and customers to talk about their successes. They make great case studies for later stages of the buyer's journey, and in a sense, a case study really is influencer an influencer piece because it talks about, from a third-party perspective, what they've experienced with your product. So we've done a number of blogs with Oracle partners for their blockchain blog site, and these were really fascinating as well as valuable. And one of these was a blog about a very large European sports retailer, Decathlon, that's using blockchain for its customer loyalty program. Also, in the case of SOC Telemed, they've been, since they don't have a lot of influencers in that arena, there just really aren't a lot in acute telemedicine. They've been shining the spotlight on their own chief medical officer, who actually has quite a large social following, and he's been blogging on his own site as well as on the company site. And so that's really adding to that influencer impact there as well.
I think to go an extra layer deeper to that customer conversation as well, especially as we think about late stage content and even post-purchase content, when the goal is to really get people engaged, maintain that trust you work so hard to build, and also, activate them, really get them using the technology or the solution. Power users, individual users, or individual teams, I think are extremely valuable sources of insight and best practices for the people that are ultimately going to be using your technology, right? So this is all about turning your brand into a source of community, a source for like-minded people to come together and share success stories. So using the influencer model to spotlight individuals that have really driven change or have helped their team see success by implementing certain best practices or hacks or systems, that allows you to kind of spotlight these individuals, which is great for relationship building, but also gives the new customers and new clients a trusted guide of helping them optimize their investment too. So I think, spotlighting those high level success stories is great, but see how you can go a little bit deeper and get tactical with the content as well.
So you've all touched on it a little bit, but again, the early days of influencer content that I saw tended to be ebooks and sort of single big rock assets in a lot of cases. But some of the best channels or alternative channels and formats that can really help make sure you're amplifying powerful influencers and getting sort of the most and stand out from these initiatives. Alicia, let me start with you.
Yeah, so like you said, we already talked about some of the key ones that I think really hold a lot of value. Blogs, podcasts. We've seen some success with the event side. So live events, of course, are on hold for now, but digital events even. There are so many different formats and ways to approach the digital event. We've tapped our clients and partners for webinars, but I've also seen and participated in more virtual roundtables or even fireside chats that are a bit more conversational, a bit more casual, but it's really about, bringing experts together for a timely and best practice oriented conversation. So I think that's definitely a space to watch. We're seeing a lot of brands test different formats and different approaches. So I'm really excited to see, what works and what doesn't, especially as we come out of all of this. And then also integrating disparate conversations or influencer-driven pieces into content hubs and interactive experiences. This kind of allows you to kind of create that tailored journey for the audience, but it's influencer-driven, which allows you to build that clout and credibility around the experience that you're trying to create.
Tanya, anything you'd add? I know social is really critical in some cases to take advantage of the clout and the network that a lot of these influencers and networks have. Anything else you've seen that's worked well or been interesting from a amplification standpoint?
Well, yeah, I'd like to, again, bring up newsletters, including influencers in content that you regularly put out, especially post-purchase for existing customers or existing clients, is I think, a great idea. It allows you to continue to educate and give customers something beyond the service or the content only. One of the keynotes at this year's Serious Decision Summit was about how buyers are changing, but we're not changing as quickly. And one of the things that buyers want is they want to continue to be educated by their vendors. They don't want the education to stop once they write a check. And getting influencers into things like newsletters or even just pieces of content that you would normally send out, perhaps have them give some commentary or have a small part of a larger piece of content is a great way to amplify your influencer programs.
Before we move on, a few different things that I think are really exciting, not quite widely implemented yet in B2B, is these new tools within social platforms. So thinking about LinkedIn Live, again, not widely implemented, but some really exciting things, I think, around using LinkedIn Live to get intimate conversations with influencers and experts to a much bigger audience, prime for discovery, and of course sharing. So that's definitely a space that we're going to be keeping a very close eye on, especially as we start to do more podcasts. Can we do a live podcast and stream it on LinkedIn Live? I think the opportunity there is really exciting because it's that amplifier, but it's also a bit more fun and casual. And I think now more than ever, people are willing to get a little less polished, right, and get a little intimate. So I think that's an exciting space to watch. And also test Instagram. I know it's largely a B2C channel at this point, but between Instagram TV, Instagram Live, and Instagram Stories, those are powerful amplifiers and create new points of entry for your audience, especially because we're seeing people follow not just, their friends, B2C influencers and brands, but if you're promoting this conversation, whether it's a webinar, virtual event, or ebook, test it through Instagram. That's a new point of entry, organic or paid, for them to get deeper into these influencer social circles, so to speak. So again, relatively new spaces, but exciting ones nonetheless.
Awesome. I wanted to ask you for your perspectives on influencer can be a timely thing. How are you seeing companies measure the success of their efforts and programs with influencer? Tanya, let me start with you.
There's been a lot of emphasis on web page views, and that's a very key KPI that a lot of influencer programs use if that's their goal. We're starting to see, though, that internally people are being given responsibility for and being recognized for building long-term relationships with influencers. So, even though there's not a metric associated with that, what we're seeing is that marketing professionals themselves, if they can make these relationships and establish them and, use the influencers when they're needed and effectively, that they themselves get some, attaboys and pats on the backs, and they look important and valuable, more valuable to their internal colleagues. So, again, right now, most of the emphasis is on web traffic, honestly, or downloads if you're doing an ebook. But I am seeing that internally it's getting more exposure when it's done well.
Okay. Alicia, you shared that bottom line example. I know they had a lot of success and looked at it in a pretty comprehensive ways. What were some of the metrics that they utilized? Yeah,
so jury is still out, so to speak, on the second iteration because it's just being activated in their campaigns, but they're going to be following a model very similar to the first iteration. So, of course, like Tanya said, the standard engagement metrics, so number of visits, social shares, reach for like paid search campaigns, but they were able to get more granular. So they were using it in email nurture campaigns. So we were looking at email open rates and click-throughs, and also marketing qualified leads and even sales accepted opportunities. So they were actually able to track, whether this foundational piece largely used to build thought leadership, build credibility for the bottom line brand, and really track it through to, is this an actual sales opportunity, which I thought was fantastic. So that's a use case, I think, to show, even though influencer marketing is largely used for that type of funnel, objective, it can very much trace through the entire buyer's journey.
Another, bigger, longer-term value that a few of you touched on was just the community and the relationships that you build through influencer programs and doing work with some of these thought leaders. What are some of the most common challenges that you folks see in terms of the community aspect of this? Tanya, let me start with you.
Well, one of the things I think that we all have to recognize is that, influencer programs in general, the whole concept of them, they're starting to mature. So more people are asking to be paid. And that's really the higher up you go in terms of tier one influencers, the ones that have the biggest followings and the biggest names and the most experience, they're going to want to be paid. But we're also starting to see some of the lower tier influencers request to be paid. And that might just be the cost of doing business. People want to be paid for the time they invest. So that's definitely a challenge for some people who haven't budgeted for it. Perhaps a better approach is fewer influencers, but really good ones that require payment. So that's one of the challenges. And then the other is that the universe of influencers in some of these niche areas are just getting too small, or they are too small still. Like I mentioned data science, data science is a relatively new career. It might seem like it's been around for a long time, but it hasn't. And so there aren't that many people that you could really peg as influencers in data science at the moment. So, but that will grow. So those are two of the challenges that I've seen.
Okay. I wanted to sort of close this discussion out with, if you could each share some examples. Let's assume some of the folks watching this are B2B marketers and they're ramping up their influencer programs, looking to do more or better. What are some of the things that you would caution them to sort of look out for, or things that they should just have in mind as they look to expand? Brenda, let me start with you.
Sure. One of the things that I've just been thinking about is something one of my clients did is that where do you find influencers? I mean, typically we do research online and we have resources that we can use to help identify influencers, but sometimes you just can't find influencers, like Tanya said, for these very niche topics. So one of the things is don't overlook events. You can go to a conference that's in your industry, and you can actually approach the experts who are giving presentations, doing keynotes or on panels there, and look to those people to see if they would be willing to work with you. As I think one of the problems is too that sometimes the influencer world is so small in some of these industries that the same people are getting hit up over and over, and they just don't have the time. So, that's just going to be a problem that you may face. So you need to really be open-minded to how you're going to get to new people and find them. So that'd be one piece of advice I might give.
Okay. Alicia, anything you'd share?
Yeah, so I think as far as things to look out for is not going into the process with a bigger plan in mind. So this ties to that whole notion of, successful influencer strategy is just that, a strategy. It's not a one-time thing. It's not a, ebook that you just want to get a lot of leads for. That's fantastic. But we've all kind of made mention of the fact that, people know about influencer marketing. We're all talking about it. We all know, when we see a roundup of experts for an ebook, okay, like this is a marketing play and like maybe they were paid for it. So I think it's really critical that we take a new creative approach and also find new ways to reuse and amplify these voices and bring new voices into the fold. So go into the process with that in mind, to try to seek out those new, lesser heard voices, even if it's not the traditional, hundreds of thousands of followers or speaking on the keynote stage. Really look for those new pockets of insight and inspiration. I think that's really key. And think about from the get-go how you're going to be reusing and repurposing that insight.
Awesome. Tanya, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's excellent, Alicia, and I would follow on that in that, you want to always be looking or always be open. it's not as if, okay, we're going to start our influencer strategy on August 1st. You really need to be constantly engaged with your buyers to understand who they're looking to learn more, to forecast for the future, to give them guidance that, they really can't get anywhere else. So I think that we meet influencers every day, but we just don't realize it. And I do think that there's going to be, because this is becoming such a quickly maturing type of tactic, that people are going to have to start looking in other areas other than just the 50 articles each year that are put out about the 10 top influencers in construction, the 10 top influencers in supermarket marketing, we're going to have to go beyond that. So yeah, you're going to have to treat everybody with an open mind, and what can they bring to the table for my buyers? What can they do to continue to educate them beyond what I'm capable of doing?
Awesome. So again, I'm biased, but I think these three ladies are some of the sharpest minds in the content space and doing some outstanding work. So I want to thank you all. For those of you that haven't checked out some of the work Content for Demand is doing, I would strongly suggest you do that. You can do that at their website, contentfordemand.com. And one other thing I would recommend is Tanya, Brenda, Alicia have all done a lot of workshop work, collaborative work, brainstorming, ideation work. You take advantage of reaching out to the team for that as well. They're doing a lot around content formats and topics like influencer. So definitely check that out, take advantage, and continue the conversation. So thank you all, ladies. This has been awesome.
Yes, it's great. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.